Now, Donald Trump has resurrected the travel ban policy from his first term, signing an executive order banning people from a dozen countries from entering the United States. Here was the US president today.
Today, I am signing a new executive order placing travel restrictions on countries including Yemen, Somalia, Haiti, Libya, and numerous others. But we will not allow people to enter our country who wish to do us harm, and nothing will stop us from keeping America safe.
Let's bring in Peter Jennings, Strategic Analysis Australia Director, joining us live from Canberra. Good to talk to you again, Peter. I'm interested to get your thoughts on this. Obviously, there's a risk to the US in taking people from these sorts of countries, but Australia takes people from these sorts of countries, so presumably we have security vetting, but we saw with people coming in from Gaza that a lot of claims the security vetting wasn't up to speed. So while Trump attacks things with a blunt instrument, is there a security rationale behind what he's doing?
Absolutely, I think there is a security rationale, and if anything, Chris, what we've seen in the last couple of years has been a return to a pattern of terrorism and the risk of terrorism growing in democracies, including in the United States. The devil is always in the detail, and I see that even for the countries that Trump has completely restricted, there will still be exclusions, people that have visas, people that can enter the United States because it's said to be in the interests of the United States. So I'm hoping, for example, in the case of Afghanistan, that means that if they find individuals that helped the American military or indeed our military during those days, that they will be allowed in.
Yep.
Often people can be critics of their own country's regimes. But broadly, I think, Trump knows this is going to be popular inside the United States, not just with his own base, but much more broadly. And it's a tough, broad measure, but it is one which is designed to, keep the United States safer from the risk of terrorism.
Now, he's done it on the back of that terror attack in Boulder, Colorado. The alleged assailant there is an illegal immigrant, Mohammed Solomon, from Egypt. So he's highlighting, and the president's gone directly to that, highlighted the problem of illegal immigrants. Are there lessons for Australia to be learned here? Because with the amount of terrorism we're seeing around the world now, surely there is no time for complacency. We need to be eternally vigilant.
Well, I think one of the interesting phenomena of terrorism is that an event happens and then we very quickly forget about it. We had what looked like a momentum towards greater violence and the risk of terrorism last year, which was manifest in those attacks on synagogues and other areas where Jewish people had been identified. Now we haven't been talking about it for a few months. The threat hasn't gone away, Chris, and I think, we are often going to be a casualty of the growth of this terrorism threat in other democracies with a kind of a copycat effect in the Australian system. So the problem hasn't gone away, and I think we've just constantly got to be alert to those risks. And that should include in the way that people are vetted before coming into Australia under any sort of visa arrangement.
Let's go to the issue of defence preparedness. We showed a bit of the CDF on the program last night. Here's some more of what he had to say.
Almost since the Second World War, about how we think of national resilience and preparedness of we may need to operate and conduct combat operations from this country. And that's everything from our northern infrastructure, our supply chains, how we integrate with industry, states and territories is quite a different answer to that notion of operating from the homeland.
So he's raised the idea, the reality, the prospect of combat operations from this country. He also talked about the sorts of equipment and funding that defence might need, and that any further requests would go to the government next year. He's of course constrained by not being too political, but the overall sweep of what he had to say only lends weight to this debate about investing more in defence, especially in light of what the American Defence Secretary has said here.
Yes, but I think it was too little too late, Chris. The number one job of the CDF is surely to be providing the government with necessary advice about the risks we face and what we have to do to face those risks. And frankly, defence has been missing from that game. It has taken itself so far away from any public discussion about these issues that really, to hear the CDF make these extremely restrained comments at a conference appears to be surprising people. Of course, the risk is greater. Of course, China has the capacity with missiles to attack any base it wants to in Australia. So how come we're only having this conversation now? You know, we've had ministers tell us for half a decade that we face the greatest threat since the end of the Second World War. Isn't it about time we did something about it? And that includes the Chief of Defence Force.
Yeah, that's a very, very powerful point. I mean, they're there to lead, and they do have immunity to some degree from the political debate. They should be able to say what we need. And let's hope they speak up more robustly in the future. We're right behind the eight ball. Now, just briefly, we're nearly out of time, but could you give us your assessment on Ukraine at the moment? They've delivered a couple of heavy hits to Russia. They must be battening down the hatches, expecting a pretty robust Russian response soon.
It's hard to know what more Russia could do than the absolute pounding they've been handing out to Ukraine this year. Russia has lifted the tempo of attacks on civilian infrastructure. You know, I think the message we should take from the last few days is that Ukraine does have a whole number of cards it can play, some serious aces, Chris.
Yep.
If they can do what they've done in terms of these Russian aircraft, there'll be more plans like that afoot. Ukraine is far from finished. It's a strong country, very determined, and I think it's going to continue this fight for as long as it is able to do so, which is another reason why we should be supporting them.
Good. Thanks for joining us again, Peter.